right, good morning, everyone. One day I will figure out this Facebook Live thing in a way that I don't start awkwardly, but that is not today. Today, we're going to talk about nice guy syndrome. And this is a topic that was voted on in the polls in the Masculine Underground. There was an overwhelmingly a large response to speak about antidotes to nice guy syndrome. It's kind of synchronistic because if you follow the podcast, we just had Dr. Michael Pariser on, who wrote a book called The Nice Guy, No More Mr. Nice Guy, The Hero's Journey. It's a workbook that works off of Dr. Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. If you're dealing with nice guy syndrome, highly recommend you check out that episode. It just dropped last Thursday, so it's up on my podcast, podcast.ruwando.com, also on iTunes and Stitcher. So it's interesting that of all the topics, guys in the group voted on this topic as well. And also, partly because of my conversation with Dr. Pariser, and also just life, someone in the group posted a question, how has quarantine affected your masculinity or something like that? The big thing for me is I've recognized elements of nice guy syndrome in myself through introspection. I went through a breakup. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I recognized, man, I got some shit that I thought I dealt with a long time ago. Like, it's kind of like smacked me in the face in a way that I'm embarrassed about, but this is also how we grow. So I'm going to share some of that with you. I'm going to share the points that I feel are relevant to all guys dealing with nice guy syndrome. If you're watching this live, if you hop on, feel free to ask questions in real time. I will try to answer them in real time. If you are listening to the recording of this on the podcast or on YouTube, and you're a guy, make sure to join the Masculine Underground forum where we hold these live, or you can shoot me an email if you have questions. I try to be available. One announcement, you may have caught me on an episode a while ago saying the archetype class is half off. If you haven't noticed, my website is still slowly being rebuilt, so I'm going to maintain this for at least another week or so. The archetype class will only be $49 instead of $97 until my new website is up. I'm not exactly sure when that will be. I hope it is soon. All right. And just a big thank you to everyone in the Masculine Underground forum. You are the reason why I choose to do these things. Even though not a lot of people hop on live, I don't know, it's just a weird thing like where I feel super comfortable and happy to speak in a live recording, whereas like if I try to record this on my own, I get distracted. I feel like I'm talking into space with nobody. It's not as fun. I don't know why. There's the performer in me or something. Not really sure. Okay, so I'm gonna speak about nice guy syndrome in 3 stages. Stage 1 being, and I'm also going to reference a few of the other podcasts that I've done because nice guy syndrome is a term that Dr. Glover created, but it's kind of an umbrella term for a lot of men's issues of personality, we could call it. I mean, we call it like issues of the psyche, but it's about the expression of ourselves, right? So we could call it an issue of personality. And there's 3 stages that I think we go through. If I'm honest, I've only gone through 2 of them fully. I think I'm dabbling into stage 3, but I'm going to share about that with you. The first stage being kind of like infant level consciousness, where anxiety and what we might call weakness or beta-ness exists. And this is where most guys who get into personal development recognize themselves. Because a guy in this stage is anxious, he's supplicating. He might not recognize he has nice guy syndrome. Here's where he's like really doing all the things that we associate with nice guys, being supplicating, living through covert contracts, trying to get favor from women or people, trying to be liked and like in a way that most of us will look at and be like, that's gross. Many of us have had behaviors like that, and we're going to talk about why those exist, but that's like stage 1. Stage 2 is the antidote, and the title of this episode, Antidotes to Nice Guy Syndrome, is kind of a play on, or it's a double meaning in that when I spoke with Dr. Pariser about nice guy syndrome, and I mentioned how I recognize that I have latent symptoms of nice guy syndrome that I thought were gone, but they're coming out in weird ways. They're coming out because I'm actually doing opposite behavior to compensate for an insecurity I have. He's like, oh, well, you have an antidote to it. The antidote is nice. The antidote is better than having the original problem, but it's still not the full solution. Stage 2 is where a lot of guys go to next, where they do the opposite of their nice guy behavior. And this is kind of what the red pill community is. In an extreme, it's what MGTOW does. I'm going to talk about the MGTOW insecurities. But it's where guys become hard asses. Guys realize, oh, that nice guy stuff I did when I was younger, it doesn't work. It doesn't get me laid. It doesn't get me loved. Uh, it doesn't get me respect. So they do the 180 opposite, which works better. You know, you tend to get more respect when you're being a hard ass, blah, blah, blah. But it's still not complete. And here's where I recognized my own shit, where I've done various things in response to my old nice guy patterns, and it's created kind of like backdoor issues in my life. So this is not the stopping point, and I say this a lot. I'm going to talk about Red Pill quite a bit. Red Pill, I think there's a lot of great stuff in that worldview, in that community. I recommend some Red Pill books to some of my clients who are so deep in like the stage 1 of nice guy syndrome that they need to learn some hardness. But you don't want to be stuck hard, and there's issues that we're going to talk about that come with that. That's kind of the antithesis of nice guy syndrome. If nice guy syndrome is the thesis, and then stage 3 is what some people would call integrated masculinity or balance or synthesis. And I have thoughts there around general security, but to be honest, I recognize that I'm not fully there, and we're going to talk about that because the thing I can speak about with most confidence is my experience, and I'm going to try to relate it to everyone. Let's get a sip of coffee, and we're going to dive in. And of course, if you haven't been on these live before, if you drop questions, I'm happy to go off on tangents. We have an hour here. I have my notes, but I like to keep things organic. So, important to define what nice guy syndrome is, even though I think most guys know what it is. And I'm going to try to speak about it in a way that is not just a regurgitation of Dr. Glover and other people. All that stuff is great, but I want to add something new that is useful. Nice guy syndrome is an incomplete expression of masculinity. It is a veneer that men put on themselves that dilute themselves because we think that'll get more validation. And it typically starts really young, and I'm going to quote Om Rapani, who was also on the podcast recently, where he said, men will do whatever they think will work. And he was referring to getting love or status or getting laid. And this is how most of us behave, especially if you have a testosterone-driven mind, a problem-solving mind, what we would call a masculine individual. You do what you think works. If you see something, if you do a behavior and it gets a response you don't like, from infant level, even or toddler level, you realize, oh, that's probably not a good thing to do. You do something and it gets a response that you do like. People clap, people cheer, your mommy kisses you, girls like you, people respect you. You do more of that, and it's normal. I mean, this is not just a male behavior. Everyone does that from the youngest age of consciousness. Oh, let me do more of what gets me things that I like, validation, love, etc. This is the root of nice guy syndrome and where it comes from, because it's not like it is a very artificial way to behave. It's not true to ourselves, but there's a good reason why many guys have evolved to do this, is because our environment told us, hey, this is good. I think we're in an extreme in our culture right now, especially the media, where the media is explicitly saying to young men to be effeminate, basically. I think the words toxic masculinity are thrown out. I really feel for younger guys right now, like the Generation Z kids, because they've been force-fed tons of propaganda because they grew up with YouTube and the internet and all that stuff. But even for the rest of us, nice guy syndrome has existed forever. Many of us were initially conditioned by our mothers, not because that our mothers were trying to dilute us intentionally, but I think this is largely, I mean, I'll speak for my generation, millennials, Generation Y, we grew up with mothers who themselves grew up in third wave feminism, and the crux of third wave feminism is let's beat men at their own game. Good reason for why they came up with that ideology, but when you are in a household where your mother is domineering or trying to control your masculinity, and really like any type of domineering behavior comes from fear. Like any person who's like seeking power is seeking power because of fear. They're trying to seek power because they once felt powerless. There was a fear of the masculine, which is also justified. And I'm saying this, I'm trying to go back and understand the reasons for these different social forces in a way that we can drop our resentment. And I'm going to talk about the red pill community and like misogyny and MGTOW in a little bit. Not for moral reasons, not because I'm trying to like make us all kumbaya, but because if you're holding on to resentment, you're actually making yourself stuck in stage 2 and not letting yourself go to stage 3. If you are, I'm critical of certain elements of feminism. I'm critical of certain ways that boys are being raised right now and some of the propaganda out there. And I sometimes get angry about it, if you notice on the podcast. But to hold on to that anger, it keeps you stuck in that mode where you can't move to stage 3 where you don't give a shit anymore, right? Like I'll get into that later. So this is why I'm trying to get to the root of it. So for many thousands of years, women have been oppressed in various ways. We can argue about the degree of it or how oppressed were they really, but ever since agriculture, and I talk about this in some of the Jungian episodes on how and why patriarchy was created and what it is really. I don't think it was from misogyny, but misogyny might be a symptom of society evolving for a testosterone-driven mind. Essentially, as feminism grew in power, and they identified their ideology of hypermasculinity is bad, and there's evidence from it. Like there have been plenty of men throughout history who've beaten women, who've oppressed women, who've controlled their sexuality, who've put them down. That has happened in life. Not that all men have done that. And the thing about ideologies is that ideologies have to have a simple slogan. So the idea behind correcting that, and it should have been corrected, right? Like men shouldn't go around beating women. That's an element of, I would say, stage 2 nice guy syndrome, which we'll get to. In an effort to control hypermasculinity, they controlled all masculinity. And in a sense, a lot of men of my generation and later have been raised consciously or often unconsciously to be docile. And it might have not have been a conscious effort of your mom, although I think, if you have particularly bad nice guy syndrome, you may notice you have a domineering mother. I think that's very common. Or I should say it the other way around. Like if you had a domineering mother, most likely you have some sort of crisis of masculinity, even if her intentions were good. And I assume most people's moms meant well. So I'm not trying to cast blame, but it's good to know where this comes from. Essentially, the dogma that was given to many of us when we were young boys is like, be a good little harmless boy and I will love you. This going into the normal child behavior of let me do whatever works, right? It's like, oh, if I don't do aggressive things, if I don't do some things which might be natural, if I don't pick your typical boy behavior, if I don't do these things, mommy gives you more validation. Of course, that feels good when you're little. Later on, you might sort of notice, and then and I'll speak for myself. This is kind of how I was raised. My mom, well, I should say this. I grew up in a typical Asian household, or a particularly Asian household, and I've actually been thinking about doing an episode specifically on Asian upbringings. I know it doesn't apply to everyone, but like there's some acute things that I think are true. Kind of relates to Catholic upbringings too, so maybe I'll make it like a more umbrella episode. But essentially, there's a lot of societal control on such a boy in such an environment from a very young age. But what happened to me and what happens to most kids is that at some point you realize, oh, the conditioning I've been given, be a good boy, doesn't get me validation out in the real world. And kids have this realization at different times. For me, it was even like around 6 years old, I recognized that the way that my mom was training me to behave, the behavior that got validated at home didn't get me validated when I was hanging out with kids on the block, right? I actually was able to make friends better by being a little meaner. Like I didn't understand it at first, but like when I was like being soft and kind and extra courteous and extra placating, little kids didn't respect me. So that was like my first click. And then of course, later on, when puberty starts to arise, I recognized, the mode of behavior that I've been like conditioned to be doesn't get girls to like me. And I remember this going back to men will do whatever they think works. I remember being in track camp when I was 14, and I was in the bunks and I was listening to like the older boys, like the 16-year-olds talk about girls because they were the wise elders in the tribe. And a lot of them were like this is way before the pickup industry or anything like that existed. So like you just had these boys like theorizing like how do you get girls to like you, right? And a lot of the older kids were coming to the conclusion of like, oh, if girls like you better when you don't care about them. And a lot of the guys were like, yeah, that's true. Yeah, like when I really like a girl, she goes away, and when I don't like her so much, she comes to me. And that's like very basic observational, a basic observation for most boys. Like, oh yeah, when I don't care, or like when I'm a little meaner, or when I treat her, when I don't do what the cartoons and Disney movies and mommy said I should do, or I don't like write her poetry and give her notes and like stare at her and tell her she's so beautiful. Like she actually likes me better when I treat her poorly. And I'm not saying this is the truth, but this is a conclusion a lot of young men make. And we recognize that this thesis of be a good boy and everyone will like and respect you does not work. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, and so just like as a sidebar, it's good to understand when it comes to ideologies, it's like a little bit off topic, but when it comes to ideologies, whether feminist ideologies or we see in the media, left-wing and right-wing ideologies are very loud. I spoke about this more in the sexual shame episode, so I'm not going to repeat it. But ideologies are a way that humans organize beyond our ability to socialize. So if we have an ideology of we're Americans or we're Christians or we're whatever, we're flat earthers, like we can all come up with this blanket ideology that connects us beyond our ability to socialize because we can only socialize with so many people. This is how we've created nation states and blah, blah, blah. But for an ideology to be effective, it has to be simple. Like you can't have a nuanced statement and put it on a picket, right? Which is why anything you put on a picket sign, any slogan that you organize an ideology around has to be simple because it appeals to a primal level of our consciousness. So they have to be something with only a few words like "Make America Great Again," or "All men are trash," or "All cops are racist," or something like that. It has to be a statement that you can just like apply to everything. You'll never see a nuanced statement on a sign like "Men are sometimes trash when they're violating women in these contexts." Like you can't put that on a picket sign. No one's gonna like fall behind that. They have to be simple and all purpose. But the problem is when you have a simple generalizing sign, it misses out on the nuances. And like I'm gonna end on this point here. Feminist propaganda has put into boys, hey, look at all this toxic masculinity, which has become equated with masculinity is toxic. And like when a boy is young and he's like impressionable and he thinks, oh yeah, it is toxic when a man violates a woman. It is toxic when they do this. Oh, I guess men are toxic or masculinity is toxic. I mean, obviously this is not a conscious level of thinking, but on the primal unconscious, it makes these conclusions. Then a boy, a young man or an older man feels ashamed of his natural impulses and it creates this disconnect. The disconnect is greatest during puberty because let's say up until puberty, you've been conditioned fully by the propaganda of your reference group of like, be a good little boy, be nice to everybody, be placating, and you will be loved and respected. And it's like, that's like seeped into you. And then all of a sudden, this primal level, this genetic programming that has been evolved into you to procreate starts coming out, and it doesn't fit. Like it's like a roots growing in a different direction than the tree, and that causes this disconnect where it creates a lot of inner turmoil. It creates a lot of like this disconnect causes shame, as I spoke about extensively in the Dark Masculine episode. But what results in nice guy syndrome is that this top-down propaganda or this top-down conditioning becomes so overwhelming that the individual is like, oh, these roots coming out of me, this sexual impulse, it must be false. Because the thing about sexuality, the reason why I talk about sex so much, not because I care about like sex skills, but of course sex skills are important. Arousal Control Secrets is my sex skills program. But sex is something you can't fake, right? The sex drive has evolved completely independently and many evolutionary generations before our rational minds, right? So it's pure in a sense, right? It can't be affected by ideology. human minds can add all this stuff and say like, oh, this thing about sex is bad and it's the devil and it's demonic and whatever, but it just stays the same. Like our sex drive is not intelligent enough to know any better, so it does what it's been programmed to do. This is nature. And I say this all the time, that two places where we can look to see how how we've been designed to behave. I don't mean designed from like an almighty creator, but designed evolutionarily is, or maybe it's the same thing for some of you, is we can look at sex and we can look at comedy. Sex and comedy exist on a level beneath our ideologies. So you can say this is funny or this should be attractive or not, and you can add all these taboos on stuff, but we still laugh at what we laugh at. And we're still turned on by what we're turned on by. And actually, if you've accepted an ideology that is totally unnatural, like let's say I use this example in the Dark Masculine episode. If you grew up racist and you believe that a certain color of person is bad, it's very normal, and this is a very common thing that racist people have sexual fantasies about the exact race that they are hating on. Why? Because our primal unconscious is like, wait a minute, that's wrong. Like, we're gonna force you to like women of color or whatever, women of non-color or whatever it is that you've been ostracizing in your mind. We're gonna force you to fetishize this to correct everything and bring everything to balance. This is not to say that everything primal is right. Like, it might be primal to want to punch someone in the face when you're angry, but the impulses need to be validated, otherwise it causes disconnect. Anyway, back to nice guy syndrome. So most of us, and if you've recognized the term nice guy syndrome, maybe if you read the book or you just recognize in yourself, oh shit, like this mode of behavior of being really sweet and being really placating and being unmasculine doesn't get me anywhere. Like, women don't like me. I recognize, oh shit, I'm a beta male, and that was like my recognition. It's like, oh shit, I didn't know. I mean, when I was a teenager, I was like, oh shit, there's a pecking order between men, and I'm very close to the bottom. Damn, how did this happen? And it's very easy to get angry at your upbringing, angry at your parents, angry at society. But that doesn't fix anything. The anger doesn't fix anything. It's just recognizing, oh shit, maybe you've been conditioned the wrong way in a way that doesn't work. The next step for most, and actually one thing with the sex stuff is that the reason why so much of this comes out during puberty, and like sex is kind of like it brings us back to natural truth. Not to say that nature's always the way we should be, but it is not natural for a testosterone-driven individual to be supplicating, deferring. I'm a masculine individual, right? Someone whose biology drives them to be affected behaviorally by testosterone, which is biological males. Actually, I don't even want to say that as much, because I mean, a lot of this might apply to certain types of lesbians. Like, I'm just saying, anyone driven by testosterone, testosterone has us behave in certain ways. And I reference the book, The Virility Paradox, a lot, because it's full of all these studies of what testosterone actually does to our behavior. And you can see a lot of it is what we typically consider masculine. So you inject testosterone to a man, woman, or child, they will have better boundaries. They will be more assertive. They will be more headstrong. They will be more focused on things. And that is natural. They will also be more aggressive and violent, and not to say that you should be aggressive and violent, but it's recognizing that the impulse is pure. The impulse is how our bodies want to behave, and if you don't validate the impulse, you're going to create some sort of turmoil. Also, this natural impulse, the sex drive, has evolved for millions of years to get laid, right? The reproductive system specifically, and all the behaviors that come off of the reproductive system have evolved because certain behaviors that testosterone drives you to do are what the opposite sex finds attractive. So this is where we enter stage 2, where the nice guy is like, oh shit, all of this nice guy stuff that I've learned is not natural. It's not pure. It doesn't get me laid. It doesn't get me validated. It doesn't get me respected. It makes me a beta male. If I want to be respected and loved and acquire sex and all the things that most men desire, I need to do the opposite. Now, I think this is kind of a necessary stage. It's possible that maybe someone who's like super enlightened can skip step 2 and go to step 3. I've never seen it before, because there are negatives that come with going to this opposite. But I don't know anybody who can just jump there. And I'm remembering a quote by Dan Bilzerian. Like if you've seen him on Instagram, he's the billionaire poker player who always has models and yachts and guns in his Instagram feed, like super hyper masculine stuff. He had a quote, I think it was on Joe Rogan, where he was, I don't remember verbatim, but he was saying something like, "Of course, money and women will not make you truly happy, but until you can get it, you can't really talk, or you don't really know." It's like very easy for a beta male guy who can't get laid to look at a guy like Dan Bilzerian or look at a guy who gets a lot of women and be like, "Oh well, he's blah blah blah. He's a misogynist. He's not actually happy. He's doing it to feed a hungry ghost." And all those things might be true, but look at where that guy's at. Like he doesn't even have the potency to make that choice, and that's not morality, right? This goes back to the lesson of the movie Clockwork Orange. If you don't have a choice, morality requires choice. Like you're not being a good person if you're forced to do the thing that's good. So it's important to have that ability. So which is why I think stage 2, even though it has some negatives, is kind of a required stage in a man's hero's journey. He's maybe, not that they say that guy has to be an asshole, but that's often what happens. And this is essentially the crux of the red pill community, where a lot of it is reclaiming hyper masculinity to make up for the fact that they were hyper beta effeminate guys when they were younger. They accepted that. The thing that I strongly dislike about the red pill community is that there's a lot of misogyny there. There's a lot of they use rationality in a very pure, or I shouldn't say pure, in a positive way. Like they look at the facts of biology and the facts of mating, and but then often you'll see in red pill literature of like, oh look, women behave this way, or women respect you more when you do this, or women say one thing and then do another. That's like a big thing that they point out, which is true. It is true a lot of times. Anybody who is, quote unquote feminine, who's driven more by oxytocin, driven more by her feelings, her emotional reality is more, especially when she's in her emotions or she's emotionally activated, what she emotionally perceives kind of overrides her rational perception, which frustrates a lot of guys. The problem is the red pill community takes this as a reason to not respect women or never trust them or treat them like animals you're trying to train. And I'm not saying this for moral reasons. I'm not saying like, oh, you should do this because it's nice to be nice. No, I'm just saying that if you take on this dogma, you will always remain hard. If you think of stage 1 as like being too soft, stage 2, one of the results of it, if you stay in it too long, is you can get too hard. And I'll speak for myself here. Like around early puberty, I fell very and deeply in love with one of my classmates. Common experience for 14-year-olds. I actually fell in love with her specifically, if I were to psychoanalyze myself, because she was one of the few girls who liked me even when I was exhibiting weak behavior, right? I was very shy. I was very timid. I avoided tension all the time. But like this one girl seemed to be friendly to me and like me anyway. So of course, what does the nice guy do? He clings to her. He attaches to her. He thinks, oh, she must be my one true love. Or I wrote poetry. I wrote songs about her. I fantasized about happy ever after with her. And I think a lot of guys when they're young, a lot of people when they're young, do this. But of course, even though she was nice to me, I was very much in the friend zone. I didn't get respect because I was doing all these nice things that made me feel seem harmless, but harmless is not sexy. So of course, my heart gets broken. I'm really grateful that red pill didn't exist, because if I had come across red pill and that kind of stuff, or MGTOW stuff, when I was heartbroken, I could have justified my heartbreak as a reason to hate women. I'm really glad that I wasn't exposed to that. But I think if I look at a lot of the guys who are super misogynistic in that world, to just see where the motives were, how they arrived to that. In the same way we can see how militant, angry feminists arrived to their conclusions, is because of pain, right? Even like one of the books that I think it was one of the best red pill books, The Rational Male. It's full of very cold, hard facts about how men and women behave on a primal biological level. And I recommend it to my clients who are very deep in that stage 1 of like being way too soft and their ideologies are all fucked up, and they still believe that the way to be loved and respected in a good man is to be super soft and supplicating. I'm like, dude, read this book, because it's full of like a lot of justifications for being harder. The problem is that he then justifies that with reasons to hate women. And if you know his backstory, which I'll tell you, like Rollo got into like his work of writing about stuff that became Red Pill eventually because his brother was a super nice guy. I don't know the exact details, but his brother got taken advantage of by a woman in a very extreme way, and ended up committing suicide over it. So obviously that broke the heart of Rollo, and he hardened against women, and he has this view of like women can't be trusted and women are no good. There's nuances to that, but again, usually ideological statements are missing nuance. They're just like women can't be trusted. Blam. So anyway, all right. So back to the stage 2 of the nice guy's journey. Very often it's like a bending the paper backwards, which is like an idea of like if you have this crease, and you can think of this crease as conditioning. This crease has made you become a nice guy, be weak, be beta, participation trophy culture. Well, if you just flatten it out, well, it's not going to be straight, right? In order to flatten the page out, you have to bend the paper backwards and go to the other extreme, and you cancel out that crease, and then you can come to a flat paper, which is our healthy, we call healthy masculinity. So a lot of guys, and myself included, learned to be harder. Even with the same girl when I was in high school, I was like, oh, actually, if I'm a little meaner to her, she respects me. And she broke my heart when I was a sophomore. We ended up dating for a short bit when I was a senior, because when I was a junior, I ended up becoming an asshole. I think it might have been a necessary stage. Is there a way to skip that stage? I'm not sure, but for a guy who's super soft and beta, I would recommend being a little harder. But it's important to make sure that you don't use it to justify hate. Anyway. Oh, and here's one of the negatives. If I'm honest, and this is one of the things that I came across myself like through lots of contemplation and introspection during quarantine, is that being harder, learning how to follow biological behaviors that allow women to feel safer and trust me and love me more has been great. It's been way better than being a sad, lonely, frustrated chump, to use old pickup terms. If I'm honest, I haven't opened up my heart as much as when I was 15. Even though it was puppy love, even though it was super, it was totally like kind of adolescent fantasy and maybe immature in many ways, and not necessarily real. I don't think we were like destined for anything in reality. It was all my pubescent brain blowing things out of proportion, which is what nice guys do often. If I'm honest, I haven't opened up my heart as much since, and I've been with a lot of amazing women, and I'm noticing now, I'm 32, like it's not bad. I've enjoyed my life. I have had fun. I prefer this than stage 1, but there has been something I'm feeling I'm missing, and I think if I'm honest, this closed-heartedness has kind of directed me in weird ways in my relationships that I've only recognized recently are still remnants of nice guy syndrome. Because like nice guy syndrome, essentially, I mean, it's a term that we use colloquially now, but essentially it's insecurity. It's like insecurity of like, I need to modify my behavior to match the environment, and which is what is the root cause of early stage nice guy syndrome of like, oh, I need to be soft and supplicating. But even later stage nice guy syndrome of like, oh, I need to be hard and aloof and cool to be liked. That's also modifying your nature. Like you're still not being pure. It's like you might have gone from this conditioning to switching over to this conditioning because this conditioning gets you laid more. But in order to be really true to yourself, you're still missing something. And Michael Pariser in the podcast last week, he called me out on this because I pointed out like, yeah, I still fall in love, right? I still like reach out for connection. I recognize I do want to be truly intimate. I want to break through the superficial, and according to my perceptions, I thought I had been doing. But he pointed out like, well, you move in with women really quickly, and I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, you like commit yourself really quickly, and like, yeah, I mean that's me. I'm being free with my love and expression. He's like, yeah, I mean that's another form of nice guy syndrome. That's like me unconsciously thinking, oh, if she finds out who I really am, she won't like me, so I better lock her down. Or like, even if I'm really honest, like even some of the things I've invested a lot of time and money in learning, like sex skills, how to please a woman in bed, how to please a woman on a first date, all the things that we're working on for good reason, right? Because even though all of this is really about ourselves, if you're a straight guy, women are the greatest pain point and marker of our feedback, right? Like if we do this and we get laid, we're like, oh, that must be good, right? And there's truth to that, right? Like women are attracted to certain virtues that are more positive. But if I'm honest, I'm like, I on some level haven't thought I was enough by myself, so I've had to learn all these things to be liked, whether it's something like learning how to empathize or learning how to give a woman an orgasm or something, and or learning or saying I love you and like loving them, even though the emotion is pure. I often recognize that I've done this sooner, maybe because of some unconscious need to like attach myself to someone, which goes back to early childhood, and I see this in a lot of guys. But anyway, so more on this stage two. If you caught my episode on Prometheus Rising, where I talk about the neural circuits, stage one is like the circuit one infant level consciousness, where we're feeling helpless and we're doing whatever will get the feminine to take care of us. So we do whatever will get mommy to give us more validation. Stage two is the toddler level, where we learn to stand up for ourselves. This is kind of a metaphorical thing. We start to use our backbone. We have a spine, and we stand up to the feminine. So like around 2 years old, 2-year-olds talk back to their parents. 2-year-olds say no. 2-year-olds try to find their own way that is not necessarily what mommy is saying. Now, with extreme nice guy syndrome, and I think this is rooted in feminism, or certain kinds of feminism, feminism has taken the boy who went from infant level of dependency to toddler level of defiance and pushed them back down to infant level of dependency. And this is something went over more extensively in the mother wound episode, the mother complex episode, where a lot of guys with mother complexes, like some sort of unhealthy attachment to the to the feminine, or to women, or maybe to their literal mother, they're stuck in this helpless mode, so they never stand up to the feminine. Like they become, and I think leftist media right now is heavily doing this to everyone in society. It's like, no, if you stand up, you're wrong. Everyone needs to, it pushes people back into helplessness, which can be seen as the victim nature. It can be seen as, I mean, on an ideological level of the state having to take care of us, right? Like an extreme, I'm not trying to say what political ideal is best, but like extreme socialism or extreme Marxism is basically infant level consciousness of like, all people are helpless, so the state should take care of us, right? Hyper capitalists like Ayn Rand people are like super in toddler nature. We're like, we don't need the state, we don't need mom and dad, we're all independent, right? Like a lot of 2-year-olds like think like, oh, I'm independent. Early stage nice guy syndrome is essentially you've been conditioned to force back down to infant level helplessness, which is why guys with extreme nice guy syndrome, many guys in this group that I've spoken with outside of the group, they're literally afraid of what their mom will think or their parents will think, so they don't do what they want. They're afraid of what social media will think. They're afraid of what their friends will think. That fear of the outside is an infant level fear, right? Toddlers don't have that fear. A lot of us will relearn that fear when we're older because of society. Which is why if you look at red pill solutions, and I think this is this is actually good. It's simple. It brings us back to toddler defiance. If you look at some of the red pill rants, it sounds like a toddler complaining about mommy. But their prescription, I think, is a good tool for someone moving through the stage. And basically, if you look at red pill forums, they all say 3 things: lift, shut the fuck up, and read the sidebar. The sidebar is their literature. And yeah, for someone who is stuck in infant level helplessness, this is a great thing. This is a useful thing to do. Lift weights because it's when your body is strong, you produce more testosterone, but also it's hard to see yourself as a helpless little boy when your body is physically strong, right? Not that any of us need to go out and go into fights. I think learning martial arts is really great for your sanity and your confidence, but you don't have to even do that. But when you feel physically strong, it's kind of hard to feel like a bitch at the same time. You know, our bodies and minds are not as separate as most of what we think. The shut the fuck up piece is like basically stop complaining, stop being like an infant level victim who's like complaining about everything. Stop complaining about women, stop complaining about your parental upbringing. The reason why I want to spend time in this episode understanding the justifications of like why feminism had this imperative, and why leftist media has this imperative, and why your parents might have done this, and why red pill guys like do this, is because if you can understand where people are coming from, you don't have to. You can, if you can have a little bit compassion for people who have mistreated you, you can let go of your resentment much more easily. If you hold on to that resentment, you can't move on to the next level, which is where I think a lot of red pill guys get stuck, because they end up in a way that I have as well, where you kind of close off part of your heart to protect yourself, but then you're not open anymore and you're missing out on something. And then the final piece is read. I think one of the worst things for the mind right now, and it's something that, like, social media puts you in a state that drives you to infant level consciousness. It's really unhealthy for everyone. It's particularly unhealthy for men, because the infant level consciousness is a more the infant level consciousness is a more effeminate state. Infancy is also receptivity. It's like infants are more driven by oxytocin, which is the hormone that drives most feminine behavior. And social media forces you that way. Social media gives you a lot of clickbaity things. Like, social media is kind of like you put an infant under a mobile where it has like the swirly things. The infant can go goo goo gaga and stuff. Your Facebook feed is kind of like that too. You're like, it's just like, oh yeah, new thing, new thing, new thing, new thing. It's not even that it's interesting. Maybe 1 out of 10 things on social media is interesting, but it's like, yeah, I mean, there's a part of you that when you're an infant, you want to be curious and look at everything. And social media puts us back into that state. Also, a lot of the content of social media throws us into anxiety. Anxiety is infant level. If you're ever feeling anxious, you drop down to infant level. And there's a lot of shaming going on. So one of the solutions here is you got to be selfish. So I'm going to go into the synthesis part, but I'm going to end stage 2, which is understanding that if you are in stage 1, where you're being super beta, stage 2 is better, right? In stage 2, you'll at least get respect. You're more likely to be attractive to women, which is why the red pill stuff does work, or pickup, or any of these things that some might say is like a little too hard. Even I would say is like a little too hard and angry and cold and Machiavellian. It is better than stage 1, because at least you have potency. Right? And women, the reason why a lot of that stuff works is that on a primal level, women would rather be with a strong asshole than a weak nice guy. And for very understandable biological reasons, in Paleolithic times, a really sweet nice guy will get his ass handed to him by the strong asshole, and the strong asshole will take her anyway. So she might as well go with the strong asshole. And this is one of the darker parts of Rollo's book that kind of stung me a little bit, which is he has this idea of war brides. War brides is like, I don't know if it's an anthropological term, but it's something that's been documented in humans, is that when an invading tribe of barbarians would kill all the men in a tribe and claim all the women as theirs, at first, of course, the woman would be upset, like, oh my God, you killed my husband and my sons and my father, and now you're the conqueror, right? Like, kind of like Khal Drogo. You conquered everyone, you've stolen me, you're raping me now. But it's been a phenomenon that's been documented that the same woman will eventually fall in love with her captor. It's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome. And Rollo calls this war brides. It's kind of a dark thing that has been documented well, and a lot of guys would use this as justification of like, oh, women can't be trusted. Like, it's kind of a heartbreaking thing to think, like, if a barbarian came and killed you, your wife would eventually fall in love with him. This all happens on a primal level, right? And but if you look at it, there's an evolutionary reason why. Like, our genes are not always looking out for our best interests. Our genes just want to propagate. If a woman is in the situation where her support network has just been killed, her provider of sperm has just been killed, and she's with someone who is not going to have that happen to him, it's actually evolutionarily a good strategy for procreation to fall in love with him and become attached to him. It's kind of a dark thing. I mean, I'm not justifying anything with it, but it is one of the reasons why strength is more important than niceness. But it's not a place you want to get stuck, not for moral reasons, but because if you're stuck in this hard-ass mode, you're not going to be settled either, right? It's very cortisol-inducing, and or it takes a lot of energy to game your wife all the time. It takes a lot of energy to like constantly be thinking of like plays, whereas like a truly secure guy doesn't have to think about it, right? It's like the whole thing with pickup techniques. If you have to think of pickup techniques, then you don't believe that you're inherently attractive, right? A really attractive guy, a Ryan Gosling, doesn't think about stuff like that. Obviously, he's very good looking, but like anybody who's like really secure in his attractiveness and his respect and who he is as a person doesn't have to think about this stuff. However, if you've been for a while to recondition yourself, which brings us to stage three, and some of the stuff I'm going to share now, I did share in the Dark Masculine episode of Healing Sexual Shame, because these things are kind of one and the same. Nice guy syndrome and shame, they are interwoven. But the first thing, and refers to the Dark Masculine, is learning how to embrace pure emotion. Someone's asking if I could do a summary of all the resources I mentioned. Yeah, I'll probably type that in the comments, or I might list them at the end of the episode. I'll do both, actually. So pure emotion. This is one of the reasons why movies like Fight Club are so compelling to men. Shows like Breaking Bad, or the idea of Breaking Bad. Like if you've watched Breaking Bad, if you remember what Breaking Bad, to break bad is to like shatter your persona, your external thing, right? And then do something crazy and instinctual, right? Something crazy and demonic in a sense. I mean, demonic meaning coming from your lower nervous system rather than your higher rationality. So like in Fight Club, if you've seen Fight Club, spoiler alert, you should have seen it by now. The guy is like living this super fake life where he's bought completely into consumerist propaganda. He's working in a boring office job to collect money just to buy IKEA furniture or whatever. And he's gone so fake that it's fucking his life up. He can't sleep, he can't live, he can't connect with anyone. So he has like this mental split where he envisions Tyler Durden, Tyler Durden's a figment of his imagination that embodies all the things that is actually true to him. So like the famous line that Brad Pitt says in the movie is, I look the way you want to look, I fuck the way you want to fuck, I am the way you want to be, because Ed Norton's character, the actual protagonist, has become so fake, right? So I would say this first part of synthesis is you need to embrace pure emotion. Red Pill does this in kind of an artificial way, which is maybe necessary for a lot of guys, because like if you've acted fake for so long, you might not know what natural is. This is a thing that they talk about in Alexander technique, which is a body work technique of like creating a true alignment in your body again. A thing that they always say is like, if you've had terrible posture your whole life, what feels like a straight back is not. Like if you've hunched over for 10 years, you might think, oh, my back is straight, but really you're like this. It's like, no, my back is straight. It feels straight. But like, everyone looking at you is like, no, that's not straight, because what's actually straight doesn't, or actually is aligned, doesn't actually feel right to you, because you've been twisted so much that you can't trust your feelings. So learning how to embrace that emotion can be very challenging. It's like a lot of guys, even guys in this group, have posted like, I don't know what I want. Like I'm trying to, I realize intellectually I need to reconnect to my desire, but I don't know what it is. Someone just asked, can I clarify the 3 stages? Stage 1 is the beta male nature. I'd say it's infinite level of consciousness where you're supplicating your instincts in order to be validated by the outside. Stage 2 is an antithesis to that. Stage 2 happens usually when a guy realizes, oh, all that typical nice guy stuff doesn't work. It doesn't get me laid, doesn't get me respected. In fact, it gives me the opposite. So they do the opposite. They become an asshole. They become very Machiavellian. They learn all these techniques to become to dominate, and like domination. That's toddler level of consciousness where you're basically trying really hard to be an alpha. And again, as I mentioned, this is better than being a beta, but it comes with negative byproducts, whereas like you're always going to be on edge. Like some of these guys, even like Rolo, when he talks about his relationship, I don't know what his actual marriage is like. Well, firstly, a lot of these red pill guys get divorced. Even like the red pill guys who like give advice on marriage, a lot of them get divorced. And I can only imagine a lot of them get divorced because they take this hard ass nature. There's this guy, I'm not going to say his name, but he's well known in the red pill community. And I've met him, and he's a very hyper rational guy. And he and he is a man's man and he does a lot of hyper masculine things, but he's such a hard ass. And he had this beautiful wife, gamed her and all that stuff. He used to talk about it in his conventions. And then at some point, he got divorced and he went on this really long, like months long rant about hating women and how women are so terrible. And like when I'm looking at this, I'm like, man, this is all of this is just more nice guy syndrome, right? I didn't think in those terms at the time, but like all this is just his insecurity. Like all that stuff he was trying to compensate for, but being such a hard ass actually pushed his wife away because you can't be a hard ass and be connected at the same time. So anyway, that's stage 2. And stage 3 is a synthesis where you have this balance where you're not being supplicating, you're having your boundaries, but you're not being an asshole. You're actually expanding. And I want to talk about the synthesis, and I'll speak on for myself. I thought I was here already, if I'm honest, but I noticed I had certain behaviors because basically, if you don't heal the wounds that were created by stage 1, even if you put even if you grow a callus over the wound in stage 2, the wound is still there. And as an example for myself, like I was super beta, supplicating, as I mentioned. I learned to be another way, in a way that women like me more. I've modified behavior to get better feedback from the environment. But then there's this thing I thankfully have never hated women, at least not consciously. And I've thought of myself as a good guy. I still think I'm a good guy, but I have by accident, I've broken hearts. I've unintentionally made women feel bad because I was trying to hold my boundaries, and not to say that was right or wrong, but it has embedded me with some guilt because even if I knew I was doing the right thing, if her reality is that I'm an asshole, which is what most people will resort to if you break their heart, they're like, oh, you're an asshole. May or may not be true, but that's usually what a person will say when their heart is being broken. It would seep in, and because I had that insecurity still, it got into me. And if the thing I realized recently during quarantine is that every single relationship I've ever been in, I've been coerced into. I've been guilted into. It's like so many women have hooked me with the same exact line, and this is not to blame them at all because this is really my issue, right? So many women have thrown this idea at me that if I was a real man, I would love them. If I was really evolved, I would learn how to love them. A lot of women have literally said to me, you don't realize how much you actually love me. And because I had this guilt and insecurity, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe they're right. Even if like, looking back, I could be like, well, there's nothing wrong with her, but I didn't really want to date her. I didn't really want to date her. I didn't really want to be in that relationship. So I've actually ended up causing more harm in women by trying to go along with this thing that wasn't really me because it was fake. And then when I realized, oh shit, when I take the breaks, I'm like, oh shit, this is like the wrong way to behave. I need to get out of here. I end up hurting her worse. So like even though I had good intentions, like good intentions in quotes, because of my nice guy insecurities, because I was afraid of making her feel a little bit bad by saying no, I made her feel a lot bad by leading her into a relationship and then ejecting. That's my own little karmic thing I'm dealing with. But if I was really in stage 3, I'd be able to recognize my true impulses and speak from that place without getting shamed into something or hopping on someone else's reality. I'm referencing a lot of episodes. I'm going to list. In Reality Dominance episode, I talked about that a lot of like whose reality has the greater gravity. I'll list all of these at the end. But the thing that the solution to this, right? Because if you're in a situation where you perceive the world to be this way and she perceives the world to be that way, or something else, or any discussion, a political discussion, an argument, a relationship thing, whatever, the way out of it is not to try to fight them, right? I spoke about this in the Reality Dominance episode. If you live at this zero-sum level of like, one of us has to be right, one of us has to be wrong, the only way to really resolve that is to kill your opponent, which is why so many wars have been fought over semantical distinctions, which from a rationalist perspective is ridiculous, but from a primal circuit 2 perspective, like only one of us can be right. At some point some point violence usually occurs. Anyway, the way out of that, and what I think is the key to true consensual dominance, is to zoom above this zero-sum level of two belligerents to recognizing the top down of like, here we are in this system, what works for us. And I think this is like the most fundamental leadership principle, the most fundamental consensual dominance principle. And I would actually bring this to the father nature when it comes to the masculine archetype. The expression of this is the father nature, Zeus, God the Father, Allah. I don't know. I mean, pick your deity, right? Shiva, whatever. The father nature, and the king nature, the same thing, right? It's a masculine consciousness that can see the entire system, like the entire realm as mine, as my responsibility, right? It's not about mine in a tyrannical sense of like everyone needs to listen to me. It's like, let me figure out what is actually best for the realm. So in a relationship or an argument, or I mean, this is what parents should do. I mean, I know I'm saying this from someone who doesn't have kids, but like, healthy parenting, if you look at yourself and your opponent, someone who wants something else and you don't want to give it to them and you don't know what's right. If you look at both of yourselves as your children or someone's children, and try to take this top-down perspective, what is best for the system, and make your decisions that way. Because if you're truly in integrity, there might be situations where you're like, okay, I want this and she wants this, but you know what? The good of all of us is closer to what she wants. Or it might be, we want different things, but what's actually best for us, even though she doesn't believe this, is to do this thing. Or maybe it's a third thing that you haven't thought of. And, going back to my relationship patterns, if I actually took that perspective, and if I didn't get triggered by my own insecurities by someone saying this other thing, I probably would have made decisions that wouldn't have stuck me in that way. Like, I don't mean any. I should have left my last relationship way sooner, but I stayed in because she made really good points of why I should stay, and she made points that triggered my own insecurities about like my fear of being an asshole or my fear of being disliked. It's like when she would throw this stuff up that triggered my fear of being a perpetrator, I kind of went along with her reality at times where I probably shouldn't. It was actually bad for the both of us for me to do that because it created more heartbreak in her. It created more pain in me. We should have went a different direction, and I failed both of us by not doing what was right for the entire system, for the entire realm. I kind of abandoned, or I didn't tap into my father nature. And I want to speak more about this father thing because this is, I think, one of the crises of masculinity. I mean, on a sociological level, the fatherless homes. I'm going to actually one more thing on the embracing pure emotion is that with that, you have to be willing to take shit from people. This is one of the things that I think my generation and younger, we suck at. And I think social media is partly to blame because when you're anyone who, is younger than 35, was a young person with social media, and social media was like in our faces and like telling us this and that before we discovered ourselves, right? We didn't get that rite of passage where we got to discover like who we really are inside. So like we're like pulled this way, like leftist media sends us this way and rightist media sends us this way, and we don't really know what we think. And this shaming that comes from the outside, it makes it really hard to discover who we are. And you have to be willing to take shit. And I spoke about this in I spoke about this in a lot of episodes that strengthening your body, making yourself feel good is so important, and like understanding selfish desire and just using the phrase I want is so critical to being a good man in the world. Why? Because if you're going back and forth, if you're so influenced by taking shit from by the shit people give you, you're gonna get swayed very easily if you don't know yourself. And I'll one example is like, so I get trolled a fair amount because of me talking about being in a cult. Like, it's another episode that I've had about when I was in a matriarchal sex cult. And a lot of people get angry at me because I talk about sexual polarity. I say like, this is feminine and this is masculine. That's taboo to some people. And I also speak about my cult experience in a partially positive way. I mean, a lot of terrible things happen there, but a lot of positive things happen there too. And most people's ideological minds can't accept nuance. So I get comments and I get emails from people calling me an asshole and misogynist and this thing. People are calling me a cult leader now. I mean, a cult leader of what, right? People calling me a cult leader because I still believe in certain elements that I talk about in these podcasts that I think are true about sexual polarity and how a man should behave. Anyway, I get a lot of shit. Usually I don't care, but whenever I let my body get depressed or whenever I start to behave in a way that is not in line with myself, I become a little more vulnerable to trolling. And I've noticed like I had to get up at 4 a.m. recently to catch a flight, and then I happened to see a mean YouTube comment, and for some reason it really stung because I let my body get depressed, and in that like physical depression, like my body was low energy, I became a lot more susceptible to influence. I talked about this also in the one of the recent episodes on compulsive behavior and like why guys shouldn't jerk off too much. Like when a guy is coming too much, his body literally depresses and he becomes more vulnerable to negative influences. So one of the reasons why you shouldn't jerk off to porn too much. Anyway, all right, we're gonna end on the father nature, because we know this, and I just saw this documentary called Uncle Tom. It was about black conservatives, and controversial documentary. But one of the points they made that I highly agree with is that one of the crises for men, but one of the crises largely for the black community. I mean, they were speaking mostly for the black American community. Was the fatherless homes. And I'm not saying I agree with this point, but it probably is true. I don't know, it might be true. They made a good point. In the documentary, they were saying that the welfare state incentivized young black men who just had children to not have to stick around. And they go into it. I'm not saying that I believe that 100% or not, but if that is true, it's created all these fatherless homes, particularly in the black community, which has led to higher crime rates and lower success rates and drop out, all the negative things that are true now. And one of the points of this documentary was that by coddling African Americans, they've actually disempowered them further and put them in a position where they're no longer standing up. And this is like kind of like a cultural nice guy syndrome. It's like you got a lot of free money so they can stay at the helpless infant level, and they never learn how to grow the backbone and succeed. That was the argument of the book, I think, or the documentary. I think that's true for men right now, where there's been so much coddling with participation trophy culture and effeminizing men and validating boys for unnatural impulses, right? Because like there's certain testosterone driven impulses that are natural to boys. Not to say that we need to go around punching each other or like being hyper competitive, but like competition and determination and taking on challenges and being strong and having boundaries and saying no and telling people what to do sometimes, or at least like directing your own reality, is so critical to testosterone. And I talk about the winner effect so often. Like if you are not perceiving that you are winning contests in your life, your androgen system literally depresses. Like you need to perceive that you're taking on challenges and winning for you to feel like a man. This is on a pure biological level. Like your testosterone system requires this. Anyway, the father nature comes from expanding and including. The father nature is one expression of the masculine archetype, or you can say it's one of the masculine archetypes. And for you to take a zoomed out, this is my last point here, for you to take a zoomed out view of yourself and an individual, or you and your kids, or you and your coworkers, or you and your teammates, or even you and your boss in certain cases, or you and your friends, or you and your society, or you and your country. For you to be able to take that zoomed out view of like what is best for all of us. Let me help direct the team or the group to what is best for all of us. You have to come from a place of abundance. Most of us drop down into zero-sum reality where each of us are competing players because of scarcity. This is true when we have scarcity in women. A lot of guys who mistreat women, or a lot of the Me Too situations, if you remember all the Me Too things that were listed, the ones that were questionable, obviously like Harvey Weinstein, complete asshole. Like I'm not, but like there's some guys who got ousted. Like I'm thinking Aziz Ansari. He didn't behave right in his situation. Like he basically misread a woman's desire. She wasn't very clear either. I don't think, I'm not defending him. I was actually disappointed in Aziz, not because I thought he was an asshole, but because I saw how bad his game is. If the story was true, like he really has bad game, or like he did all those things because he misread the signals from a woman because he's in scarcity, which I was kind of surprised by. A famous comedian, I thought he gets a lot of ass. But anyone who's in a scarcity mentality is going to do things that feel justified, truly feel justified, because if I don't have enough money, then of course I'm justified in stealing. If I don't have enough sex or I don't have enough love, of course maybe I'll lie or manipulate to get into your pants. And you can pick anything that you perceive that you don't have enough for yourself. So in order to truly take the father nature, you need to perceive abundance. And abundance doesn't come from necessarily having a lot, because there are billionaires who feel money scarcity. There are guys in the pickup community who've laid 500 women, but they still get all flustered, or like they become like super anxious around a woman they could sleep with because they don't feel like they have enough still, and they do weird things. Abundance is the perception that abundance is trust in the future. It is trust that I don't have to cut corners to make this money. I don't have to cut corners to get in this woman's pants. There will be more money and there will be more sex in the future. I don't have to compromise myself as an individual to get what I want. Abundance is trust in the future. Scarcity is distrust in the future. It's like, I need to do this thing that is against my own integrity because I don't know when I'm going to eat again, or I don't know the next opportunity I'll have to get laid, so I have to do whatever I can to get in this woman's pants. All of the negatives in masculine expression come from this perception of I'm not going to have enough. Beta males always have fear of the outside. When we go back to stage one, a beta male is stuck in infant level consciousness where he's afraid to leave the womb. And you know, a lot of guys I speak to who are afraid to take a leap of faith in a way that is true for them. Like, they want to travel the world, but they're afraid to leave. They want to quit their job, but they're afraid. They want to go have an adventure with wild women, but they're afraid of what their family will think or their friends will think. It's this basic like primal fear of leaving the womb. It's like this distrust of what's outside of the safety net of your mom's belly, right? You have to get out of that, and that comes from trusting that there will be more in the future, right? Like, a guy who's truly secure with women, or a guy who's truly secure in business or with money, doesn't have to cut corner because he knows there will be enough for me, right? I don't have to do this. So this is the problem with stage two, is that the red pill guys go super hard ass. They go hyper Machiavellian, super aggro sometimes, because they're afraid that if I don't do this, there won't be more for me in the future. And I'll speak for myself because I'm partially in this camp. I have 1 foot in that camp at least, which is like, I have compromised myself in relationships because I felt like, well, if I don't take this opportunity, like, here's this woman, this is probably not the right thing for me, but if I don't take this opportunity, it might not come around again. And I've not necessarily thought that like in that conscious terms, but I've look back at my behavior. I've basically behaved in line with that ideology, which is, again, a scarcity ideology, because a true alpha, a true father completely trusts the future. He completely trusts that he's going to be taken care of. And this can go into the, this can kind of seem spiritual, where I think spirituality is a great mechanism for developing that trust. Because if you look at life from like red pill eyes of like cold calculating, purely material cause and effect, it can kind of be hard to justify how can I trust the future when like everyone, there's a dog eat dog world out here. This is kind of like extreme conservative politics. Like, it's hard out there. People are screwing each other over. This is why I have this tattoo, prisoner's dilemma. Like, people are incentivized to screw each other over. How can I have that? It does require some faith. And I think it is easier if you subscribe to a religion or you believe in a higher power that like, oh, I know that there's a greater father taking care of me, right? There's someone looking out for me. So I don't have to do things that hoard my wealth or hoard sex in order to feel loved and needed. I can do what is right for the collective. Yes, and I want to end on this. This is related to the religion and the father nature. This is something that came to me during a recent LSD trip. I spoke about it briefly in the last solo episode I did, but I was like working through like my purpose and like what I want to do in life, and I don't want to like pump out garbage into the internet, which seems to be what most people do. I mean, that's me being resentful a little bit, but like, so I don't want to be someone who just like pumps out stuff that I don't feel proud of. And then I thought about suffering, and I went into this like egoless place that most people go when you trip hard enough. I had taken quite a bit of acid, and I went from having my own fears of like, but if I don't do this, I won't have enough money. If I don't do this, I won't grow my career, blah, blah, blah. And so like just having like this like recognition that there are all these people suffering, right? And I just like, I felt that, not from like, I felt like, wow, there's so many people in way worse trips than me. There's so many people, trapped where they can't get any love from any woman. They can't get ahead in their career. Like, it's like just trapped, and it's like so painful. And I just like, from that egoless perspective, I'm like, I just want to take all their pain. Like, I can handle it. I just like want to take all their suffering. And I was like, oh, this is the Jesus archetype, right? Like, and because I grew up partially Catholic. I might talk about that in another episode. But I never understood the whole thing of like Jesus died for our sins. Like, even from a Christian perspective, I never understood, what did this guy being nailed to a cross have to do with my sins? Like, so he died, I can sin and get a free pass into heaven? Like, that's not true. Like, it never made sense to me what Jesus dying had to do with our sins. But then I thought about, like, just what it means to take someone's sins or take someone's suffering. We think of sin in a karmic level, which is not really Christian, but we think of sin in a karmic level of, like, you do this, you will get punished for it, or it'll come around back to you. We can see this in cause and effect. Like, you act fake and you placate and you put on this pussy hat and, like, supplicate to women just to get into their pants. They're not actually going to like you. That is your karmic backlash for being fake. On the other end, you become a hard ass and manipulative to get into women's pants. You will also get heartbroken, or you will also block yourself from real intimacy and love, and that's your karmic backlash. Like, I never speak about morality from a pure moral perspective, because I feel like morality abstracts you from real cause and effect. Like, the reason why you shouldn't stab people or steal from people or be an asshole is that it'll always come back to you. You try to steal money from someone, you keep doing that, someone's gonna fight back, right? Like, that is your karma, right? That's the cause and effect, pure logical reason why you shouldn't be an asshole, not for some, like, holy reason. Because, like, there's always gonna be a badder guy out there than you. But anyway, the Jesus archetype, and if you think of sins that way, I was like, oh yeah, I just want, like, everyone just, like, I'll take all your sins. Like, I don't have that. I mean, when my ego came back, that kind of dissolved. I was like, no, I don't want to take other people's problems too much. Oh, this is why I do the work I do. I do want to help people with their problems. But I think this is highly related to what I think is a solution to nice guy syndrome. Whereas if you can get over your shitty stage 1 conditioning, if you can have compassion so you don't have to become a hard ass in stage 2 conditioning, in stage 3, you enter in a place where you can have trust in the future. Have trust that if you act right, you will be taken care of. And it might not be the thing that seems to get the immediate hit of validation by acting fake and soft. It might not be the thing that is like, oh, I'm going to trick her into bed. It's like, I'm going to do what's actually right, what's actually good for the system. And what's good for the system does include women want to have sex. Women want to be around a strong, powerful man who can protect them and they can love securely. People want to be led. Kids want to have a strong father figure that can guide them. Like, this is actually what's best for the system. It's not you domineering or being an asshole or being alpha for the sake of your own benefit. It's like, human beings need true alpha males who are secure enough to lead and protect and guide and make love to in a way that everybody wins. If you can really act from the father nature top down rather than we are all players competing for the same resources, that I think is the true synthesis of nice guy, the antidote of nice guy syndrome. So I hope this was useful. I know a lot of guys wanted to speak about this. Yeah, so I hope this was useful. I tried to add something new. Also, I recommend checking out the podcast that just dropped on the Ruwando podcast, episode 88 with Dr. Michael Pariser. We had a great conversation about other aspects of nice guy syndrome. And if you want to go back into my archives, I have a conversation with Dr. Robert Glover, who wrote the book No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is also a great conversation. You can check those out. I promised someone that I'm going to list all the resources I mentioned. So let me go back through my notes and try to mention them. Certain podcasts that I mentioned of my own, the Dark Masculine Sexual Shame episode. I mean, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback of that helping guys, so I think that's something you should look at. If you're stuck in stage 1 and you're having trouble accessing your darkness, it's almost certainly attached to sexual shame. That sexual shame is driving unnatural behavior in you, and you have to connect to that. That's why, again, Fight Club, Breaking Bad, anti-heroes journeys tend to be so compelling to men. I mentioned Prometheus Rising, which talks about the 4 neural circuits, the 4 basic neural circuits that drive our behavior. I reference them in a lot of episodes. You should listen to that episode. It makes a lot of behavior make sense of how our behavioral systems don't always work together. Our first 4 behavioral systems evolved separately, and they kind of they can cause inner conflict just by design. Someone's asking, can you speak a little on what I'll call self-ejecting and allowing myself not to move forward and engaging in the feminine and the potential pleasure there? Great question. I would go back to this idea of being afraid to leave the womb. So I'll speak about the winner effect again. Very simply, is that it's a biological phenomenon where when you do something that has stakes, where you perceive, the stakes are subjective, right? Where you perceive there's an opportunity to win or lose. That is very critical for the androgen system, the system in your body that processes testosterone and the effects of it. If you don't put yourself into challenges, it actually atrophies, which is why guys who grew up never playing competitive sports tend to be less competitive when they grow up. So speaking to your specific thing about engaging in the feminine, a guy who self-ejects, and I self-ejected a lot, especially with women, but in a lot of things, is a fear of that. I wouldn't even say it's a fear of losing. It's a fear of the tension that comes from being in that state where you don't know if you won or lost. Because I know when I was first working on relating to women, or even like basic approaching women, or asking a woman out, the tension of does she like me, does she not like me, was so hard to process that I would do something to like come to the conclusion quickly she doesn't like me. And a lot of guys do this. We're like, if they look at a woman, she'll look away and be like, oh, she must hate me. She's like, no, she doesn't know anything about you. She just happened to look and look away. But they drive themselves into self-rejection because the tension of does she like me, does she not like me is too hard. And I would relate that to like being afraid to leave the womb. It's like we don't have trust in what's going out there, so I don't even want to leave my mom's vagina. Solution to that is to it goes back to the true perception of abundance, of okay, this woman here might reject me, but I need to give her the chance to like me. I need to give her the chance. If you're self-rejecting, I think it's a fear of the tension of not knowing. And I gave this assignment to one of my clients recently because like he's very afraid of what people think of him. Approaching a woman and like flirting with her is far beyond his edge at the moment. But he has all these incorrect perceptions of people because he hasn't actually engaged. So he's like, I think people hate me. I don't know, but I think people hate me. And he's like brainwashing himself into thinking people who don't know. I'm talking strangers here, like they hate him. It's like that. It's very unlikely anyone hates you. They probably didn't even notice you. So I gave him the assignment to go around. And ask people. Hold on, shit. Sorry, I got a pop up. I gave him the assignment to go out and not hit on women, not like flirt or try to do anything. Just like literally go up to people and say like, hey, I'm working on myself right now. Can I just ask you a weird question? Or you don't even say the work on myself. Can I ask you a weird question? Can you give me your true first impression of me? And just that breaking that wall, one, has got him out of the womb, the safety of his home, not his mom's womb, but the metaphoric womb. And like finding out that many of his perceptions are wrong. You have to collapse that wave function of uncertainty. That's why decisiveness is such a critical masculine trait. And we know that decisiveness is related to testosterone. You inject testosterone into a person, they become more comfortable in making hard decisions. A guy in infant level consciousness doesn't want to make decisions because he's afraid of collapsing the wave function. He'd rather leave everything as uncertain. The cat is both alive and dead. She likes me and she doesn't like me. I'm going to succeed. I'm going to fail. I'm just going to leave that in the possibilities. Like I could be all of these different careers, but I'm not going to commit to any one of them, which is a boyhood trait. So I hope that addressed your question. Let me see if there's anything else on self-ejecting. You have to be willing to die. I think last episode I read the quote, man in the arena. It's better to fight the good fight and lose than to not play. Because you're actually... and actually one more thing on that, if you're afraid to engage with the feminine, one, I would actually recommend another episode. Listen to the Mother Complex episode. We talk about the roots of engaging with the feminine, or viewing all of the feminine as your mother rather than a lover, because you haven't risen up to be a peer with the feminine, so you turn every woman into your mom, which can be intimidating to some guys. Is recognizing again that the most beneficial thing for her, if you really want to be a good man, the best thing you can do for her is to be someone that can give her pleasure. Right? If doing it for your selfish motivation isn't good enough, if like your own happiness isn't good enough, just think, if you don't give her a chance to like you, you're actually letting her down. Maybe that'll help. I hope that helps. You can let me know. Oh, and actually another episode that I mentioned is the abundance model episode. I didn't mean for this to be an episode where I just plug all the rest of my episodes, but I'm referencing topics that I've talked about in more depth. Because nice guy syndrome is kind of an all-encompassing thing that relates to a lot of things. The episode is the abundance model with Matt Cohn. It's mostly speaking about abundance in terms of money, but everything we talk about in that episode can be related to love or sex or validation or respect. It's a way of it gives you a framework of actually dealing with the resource that you feel scarce about. We speak about money mostly, but you could apply it to sex or love. Treating your resources in a way that forces abundance. It's not like thinking abundantly, law of attraction nonsense. It's like you actually behave in a way with that resource in such a way that it forces you to have more than you need. And when you perceive that you have more than you need, because it's not about having a dollar amount or a number of women you've had sex with, like when you perceive there's more than you need, a lot of your scarcity behaviors, your grasping behaviors, your nice guy things, your cutting corners, your unethical moves, a lot of them, you just disincentivize them. Like if you know that you have enough money, there's no reason for you to ever cheat someone out of a deal. If you know you're going to have all the beautiful lovemaking that you want, there's no reason for you to manipulate a woman into bed. You can just, this is how things are. Father Nature, I know everything is good. Let me do what's good for everybody. What else? I reference a few books. Obviously, know Mr. Nice Guy, the book that coined the term nice guy syndrome. In the episode with Dr. Michael Pariser, it was referencing his new book that just came out, which is a workbook to Know Mr. Nice Guy. Know Mr. Nice Guy, The Hero's Journey. It has a bunch of exercises that tie to the Nice Guy book. And if you want a more in-depth thing, there's the 21-day Masculine Archetype Challenge, which is still half price right now. If you go to ruwando.com/archetype-50, so ruwando.com/archetype-50, it's still half price because my website is slowly being rebuilt. Let me see if there's any other. I referenced anything with testosterone. You really should check out the book, The Virility Paradox. I did mention it, and I had the author on my podcast last summer as well. So I recommended it in the Masculine Underground group, and someone mentioned that the description seems kind of anti-masculine. And the author's a really nice guy, great guy, left-leaning, which is fine. Left-leaning tends to be more feminine. If you can look past his value judgments and just look at the studies, it'll show you in very pure, clear, objective biology what is masculine, what is actually connected to the male sex hormone. And I think it was useful for me of recognizing, okay, there are a bunch of cultural things related to testosterone or to masculinity, but there are a lot of things that are purely biological, and they've evolved for very good purposes. And it's important for anyone who wants to be the masculine role in his relationships or his group or his team or his family to embody those because they're beneficial to the tribe. What else did I reference? That's it. Let's see. There's one more question. I said, thank you for the response. Also experiencing seeing signs from women and making up as it wasn't a sign. Yeah, a lot of people do that, justifying the low tension possibility, right? So I'm going to read into your situation. I assume it's the situation where you see you're engaging with a woman on some level. It's not clear on whether she likes you or not, but you are interpreting a random tell as a negative thing. Oh, she doesn't like me, as justification for let me disengage and go back into the womb. A lot of guys do this. I've done this a lot. Like when I was doing pickup, I would leave a conversation as soon as I ran out of things to say, which would be pretty soon because I was nervous. And like my friends or my coach at the time would be like, "Why'd you leave? She might have been into you. Like it was too soon to tell." You need, and the best advice that I got back then is to stay in the conversation until she leaves. Not that you should go around bothering women, but most guys who are afraid of women, they will read into situations thinking a woman doesn't like him when she might actually like him, or she doesn't even know yet. Like, it takes someone a bit of time to decide whether or not they like you sometimes. So I would actually maybe even give you the same exercise of like, if you are in a point where progressing or escalating is impossible for you or is not where you're at right now, if you're engaging with a woman, use it as an opportunity to grow. Because if you leave, maybe you're going to get rejected anyway, but you're never going to grow from it. You might as well say like, hey, I'm really nervous right now. I feel really awkward asking this, but I have this idea in my head that you did this and this means you don't like me, or you could phrase it anyway. Like you want to get feedback from someone and like ask for honest feedback. Be like, hey, listen, I'm really trying to work on myself. So if there's anything I did or said that you didn't like, can you just let me know? Because I really want to know for next time. If you say this to any woman, she will probably be honored. Doesn't mean she's gonna fall in love with you from that, but she'll be like, oh, okay, here's exactly what it was. You did this, and I thought it was like kind of creepy, or I thought this was a turnoff. Or she might be like, no, that really meant nothing. Or she might even say like, oh, actually, I kind of like you. Like, what are you talking about? You gotta collapse the wave function and get real feedback. That's the best advice I would say for someone, because if you are staying in this realm where you're not getting that real feedback and you're trying to interpret things that aren't real, you're now creating a false reality for yourself. You are brainwashing yourself into a reality that is very far away from other people's reality, which one means it's going to be impossible to connect with people, and two, it's going to be even more impossible to take on that father nature, because in order to take on that true father nature, you need to be in the same reality as other people. So I think that's it. Unless there's any last questions, we will end. Apologies if I talk too fast or my throat's been, I don't have COVID, but I have a sore throat. And actually, I don't fucking know, but I'm pretty sure I'm healthy. But anyway, I don't need to apologize. I'm just letting you know. Is there anything else I have to say? Oh, next episodes. I have some episode ideas of what I might want to talk about. I'm going to put a poll in the Masculine Underground group for that. Thinking about speaking about Asian or maybe cultural conditioning. I don't know if I want to make it specifically Asian, because I think Christian households have certain things. That's one thing. So like parental upbringing of a sort. When I put in the polls, the last two polls, people added the second most voted on thing was bisexual shame, which I thought was interesting. So if that's voted on, I will speak about that. I don't have a ton to speak about that. I have explored my sexuality. So I'm not really sure what it is that all those guys wanted to know about bisexual shame, but if it's voted on, we will talk about it. I can share my own experience at least. Anyway, then someone else spoke about, excuse me, abundance. And I would like to speak about abundance, both from whether it's with sex or love or money. It can get a little spiritual. I'm gonna try to ground it. The abundance model is very practical, I think, but I could speak about the abundance model if that's what's voted on. Great. All right, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.